Oh, here it is. All right. Yes. So we'll be doing backend development with Django. So before we start moving on to Django, we'd have to understand what we are creating with Django. So in this case, we're using it to create an API, or in this a REST API. So the easiest way to think of a REST of what an API is, imagine you are at a restaurant and you are ordering food. Um, you are telling the waiter what you want, right? And what the waiter then does is he walks to the kitchen and tells the kitchen what you want, and waits for the kitchen to s- serve the waiter the food. Once the waiter gets the food, he brings it back to you. So in the case of this analogy, you can think of you are the front end requesting data from the API, which is the waiter. You can tell the waiter whatever you want, and the waiter will then take your request. So like the what you're trying to order, and he'll walk to the back end, which is the kitchen, the chef, and he'll tell the chef, I want this, this, this. And once he gets that, he'll return this food to you, which is can be seen as the response. So basically, the API does everything for you. It's like you can ask the API for something, and it'll return your response. Also, if it doesn't exist, then you get like obviously the waiter tells you it's not there, and then we have like error codes for that as well. Like 404, you can't find it or not found. APIs are stateless in nature. So well, REST APIs are stateless in nature, so no client information is stored between the requests. So the only job of the API is it's sort of like the middleman between you and the chef in the back. So the front end and the database. That's its main job. So yes, but APIs follow a backend architectural pattern that follows the get, post, put, patch, delete methods. This basically allows us to do CRUD functionalities on the backend database. So yes, API stands for application programming interface. Okay, I don't know why there's a repeat. Hold on, this shouldn't be happening. Sorry, I don't know why it's repeating. This is better. Yes. Okay. So what is Django? So Django is it's just a framework, a Python framework that's used for creating server-side applications. Um, it's in this case we're going to be using it to create a REST API. It's a very good full stack framework because it includes a lot of things out of the box. So like let's say authentication, lots of middleware like cores, all that is already ready from out the box. Um, in comparison to Flask or Fast API, if any of you guys have done 3403, you would notice that for Flask, you'd have to install a lot of these like external dependencies just so that you can have like login functionality, authentication. That's why Django is considered a full stack framework. Though, even though we're not using Flask and Fast API, there are still very good alternatives for REST API for creating APIs. It really depends, or it boils down to what you want to build. Like depends on the application that you're building. If you need something that's very stripped out, I would go for the others. But in the case of Elucidate, I think that Django would definitely make our life easier. And yes, like so libraries like Flask and Fast API, they'd be more suited for things like microservice construction. So what is a Django REST framework? So it's just an external library that we are going to use in conjunction with Django to basically it just makes creating REST APIs easier. It allows us to use a lot of shorthands instead of like reinventing the wheel. So it's things that it includes are like features like authentication, general API views, which you'll see later, which do make things a lot easier, and serializers. And more on this after. So before we go on to the frameworks, it is important to understand what the object relational mapping is. So what this allows us to do is query and manipulate data using object-oriented programming paradigm. So it allows us to just like it basically allows instead of writing queries into your code, we interact with the database through objects. So every time you're querying or there is a request, you can always think of it as manipulating this object. Each framework has their own ORM. So Django has the Django ORM. Flask would have the SQL Alchemy ORM. Um, yes, this also saves us a lot of time because we only define our data model once. It fits in better because it's the same language. You don't have to constantly switch between SQL and like Python or the language you're dealing with. And it's just generally a lot easier to maintain because you're not repeating yourself, and also all the code is written in one spot. So now we have the typical Django file structure. Um, so you'll see that in each package there's always an init.py. This is even though it's blank or there's nothing there, this is necessary because this tells the Python interpreter to treat it as well, that folder as a directory containing a package. It will not pick it up if you do not have this init.py inside. So sometimes, when I was learning this, I ran into that problem trying to figure out why it wasn't picking it up. And it's just because I was missing that. ASGI.py is not too important at the moment. It's just setting up the server to handle requests asynchronously. Settings.py is important. This is where your application settings can all be defined. More on this after. urls.py is where you can define, well, it's sort of self-explanatory where you define the URLs where each resource can be accessed. And Whiskey.py, so web server gateway interface. That's more used in deployments, just setting up a Whiskey server. So settings.py, this is where important things like time zone, start of API URLs, Django, install Django applications, very important. So, and more on this after. Middleware. So middleware, you can think of it as a toll gate or like a middleman. So like this can be used for authentication, maybe even logging. Database configuration and drivers. This is also important. So depending on the backend database you're using, this would change. By default, it is set to SQLite 3. Um, but in the Elucidate project, I think it has been configured to use Postgres. And you'll see that there are some external dependencies that have been installed as well alongside that. Debug is true or false. This is important because if you're developing, you would want debug equals to true because every time you make a change and you hit save on VS Code, you would want it to update automatically, and it'll be a big pain in the neck if like you'd have to like stop server and restart server again to view those changes. So definitely make sure that debug equals to true during development. On the other hand, if you're in production, you definitely do not want debug to be true. You don't want to be showing the errors to users outside. Allowed hosts, this is more to do with production. So it's just validating HTTP host headers and secret keys. So that's just used to sign data structures that are sensitive to tampering. Okay, so within Django, the file structure, we have Django apps as well. So we can have a Django project with multiple Django applications within it. So same init.py, same as before, important. Otherwise, Django will not pick it up. Admin.py, this is used to register the Django models with the admin site. Apps.py, so this is if you want to have a specific application configuration for the app instead of like dealing with well, these settings within the main settings.py. Models.py, so this is where your database models are defined. So this is where, well, this is where the ORM comes into play, the object relational mapping. Serializers, the Django REST framework serializers are written here. Tests, URLs, and API views. We'll branch more on this in the next few slides. So first, most importantly, models.py. So this is where you define all your models. Okay, each model maps to a single database table. Um, and this is where you can define the sort of fields that your database would have, or sorry, your table would have. So like whether it's an integer, Boolean field, or a char field or text field. Some important things to note: null equals to true or blank equals to true. This may be a bit confusing, and you may run into issues with that. So it just allows you to store empty values as null, or allows the fields to be blank. It would be good to include default fields as well. Um, Another important thing is specifying primary keys. So by default, if you don't specify a primary key in this models.py, an integer field will automatically be added, or a big integer. So all it is just an integer that auto increments with every request you make. And then to create many to one relationships, you'd use models.foreign key when defining the field, and many to many fields. Very straightforward. Also, you could also define other helper methods as part of the class. So this could be like maybe getting like you could do validation if you want. Basically anything to help you with your models or dealing with passwords. Next we have serializers. So the job of the serializer is to convert Python data types to JSON or XML. Because mainly the front end would be dealing with data in JSON, and when we're dealing with data with the back end, it's usually a Python dictionary. Validation can be used to serializers can be used to perform validation as well. And yes, so the serializer defined there is used to serialize and deserialize, so going back and forth between data types. Um, so the long way to do it would be if you really wanted to go into the nitty gritty, you could use the serializers class from the REST framework. There would be significantly a lot more code than using model serializer. So basically, what model serializer is just sort of like a shorthand for serializers. Instead of defining all those, like basically reinventing the wheel and rewriting all the code, you can just use model serializers, which automatically generate fields based on model, and it generates validators for serializers. Basically, it's everything. It makes instead of writing 20 lines of code, you can write just 3 to 5 lines of code. So it makes everything a lot simpler. Next, we have urls.py. This is where you define the URLs. It's also where you can, yeah, which views and methods the URL invokes when called. So next, this is important. So views. So views are used to. This is where most of your backend logic is defined. Your HTTP methods are defined here. So your get, post, put, patch, delete. Um, Responses are processed here. Local files, and even calling other APIs and services to work with the API that you're dealing with is defined here. So any form of backend logic, all within views.py. So yes, we will be using API view from the Django REST framework to define views. There are two types of views basically: the class-based views and function-based views. Um, and these views are registered with the URL. So what that means is when you hit like a URL with a response, sorry, with a body, you can define which view that it calls. And one more thing. So if we are reusing views, okay, class views and function-based views have their pros and cons. Function-based views are definitely like easier to write, but if there is a lot of repetition, you might want to consider class-based views. Okay, this is the most important thing. So what are database migrations? So if you look back in this file structure here, we have this folder here, migrations. This is probably the most, well, you're going to have a few migration folders. I would say this is probably the most important, or if not one of the most important folders in your backend. Reason being is, okay, so migrations can be sort of like the version control for the state of a database. And when I say state of a database, I mean like the schema of a database. So it is very, very dangerous to modify this if the application is in production, because you don't want to accidentally run these modifications on your database. Um, it would just cause your database to break, because this is like saying, okay, what a migration file is basically. the scripts that tell, let's say, or create this table with this, and these fields. And then if you make another modification, it will add another migration file on top of that, which runs another script saying, add these fields there. But if I delete the first migration file, and the next time you try and run migrations again, it's going to break because it's going to be like there's that bit of history in the database that is not there when the migration script is missing. Interesting as well, like you can actually create a custom migration file if you need to perform a really complicated edit on the database. This is also very risky, so please test it properly before you add it to production if you are doing this. But it's highly unlikely that we would have to do this. It's just there. And yes, this allows us to travel in between states of the database. So you can like migrate backwards and forwards, and there is a way that it tracks which migration file comes first. Okay. Also, between that, we would also have. I hope everyone is comfortable with using the terminal because dealing with backend, you'd have to run a lot of commands. So in the case of Django, you run Python manage.py with one of these commands down here. So creating an app within Django is just this here, very straightforward. Running server, that's just though I think for the Elucidate project, Docker handles it for you. Create a super user. This is required if you do want to visit the Django admin site. I will show you this after. Okay, this is important. So make migrations and migrate. So make migrations, basically what it does is it looks through your Django apps or the app specified at the model, and it from that model it generates a migration script that will run or alter the database schema. So you can think of this migration script as like a staging area, like to view your changes before you actually like run them on your database. Also, it would be good if you run it with the N flag. It's always good to give the migration a name or like some description of what's actually being changed. And then once you've actually reviewed the migration file, you can run python manage.py migrate, or you can specify the migration script that you would like to run. Reason why I say that is you might not always want to migrate to the latest change. Um, like one area where you would want to specify the migration script is if you would want to migrate backwards. Python shell, no, migrate manage.py shell. That's just Python shell. Show migrations. This is also an important one. Um, it just shows you what's been applied. Just more debugging. Flush deletes everything. SQL migrate is one, like if you're still not too familiar, you could have a look. Like I mean, what's going on? It's sort of like just helps you visualize what's going on in SQL. So interesting story about show migrations is basically we had the waste project last year, and we had thought that there was a mistake on the back end that caused the whole application to break on production. And the way that I fixed it was, I mean, we thought there was, I mean, everyone thought it was a database problem. So the way we went about debugging it was we connected to the cloud database, the database in the cloud, and we ran this command show migrations, and we checked that in fact the migrations that were pushed weren't actually run on the cloud DB, and that it wasn't actually as fatal as we thought, and it was just some small problem with the deployment. But yes, if the DB does break, it is a very difficult fix, a difficult and risky fix. So yes, anything to do with database modifications, this is very hard to fix. Changing database models, this will cause changes in the migrations, but like I said, you have to run make migrations before you can run migrations. So that's also sort of like a fail safe. And yes, if you do want to remove migration script files, um, you would have to migrate back a migration before deleting it. It's basically all you have to know is anything to do with migrations is dangerous. But everything else, please like feel free to like views. Um, everything else, it doesn't really make a big difference. And yes, if you're developing locally, um, have you guys heard of I would recommend downloading Postman because this helps you test your API. And yeah, one common problem that I noticed we had last year was people were working on one branch with a certain set of migrations on the database, and then they were switching branches, trying to run the API with a database where the migrations were newer than what they were on, and they were trying to figure out why it wasn't working. Um, so that is another reason why migrations are important. And yes, that's it. So let me set up the live demo. Do we have any questions so far? Yeah, oh no, no, the workshop's not over yet. I'm gonna set up the demo. Hold on. All right, can everyone see this? Do I need to zoom in? Actually, hold on. Let me just like close this. So I'll just go through a simple to-do API that I've made. So when you first start the project, you'd have to create a virtual environment. So and you activate it. Okay, now that it's been activated, we can CD into our backend. So is it big enough, Ash? Okay, is that better? Okay, and to start, okay, hold on. I'll just go through the file structure first. So we have our main project here, where our settings that I spoke about before, secret key, debug, allowed hosts, installed apps. So yes, if you are using the REST framework, this would have to be here, REST framework, and to do. So in here we have a to do app that I've created. Whatever apps you want to create, you have to add it to this, else Django will not pick it up. Middleware, so this is where your authentication stuff can be added. Um, templates. Okay, databases. So this is where your Postgres or like your database drivers would be defined as well. Using SQLite 3, there's not much to it, but if I'm not wrong, Postgres and previously we used Microsoft SQL Server. You do have to download external dependency drivers and add it to this. Yes, time zone and yep. Okay, and also one important thing is things like secret key, debug, and allowed host. Generally, you wouldn't want to hard code it into your code. You would keep it in a .n file and you would read that file in because you don't really want to like it's like saying would you like to put your password on your GitHub like just openly. It's not really good practice and it's big breach. Okay, next we have the urls.py. So the admin, this is just to the admin side, and the AP. What I've done here is I've said whatever is AP have API, and whatever after that, I'll follow the URLs after the to do app. So this just makes managing it easier. Okay, so within our apps, within the to do app, empty init py. Okay, so the admin side. This wait, hold on. We'll start with the models. So we have a very simple to do model here, right? Um, so we have a to do item and complete default equals false, and this is where you can define like basically your constraints in your schema. Serializes. So yes, from the REST framework, serializes. There is a way that normally you could define it all out like this, like the fields that you would like to serialize. And if you notice, there is an ID here, which I don't have in models, because if you don't define ID, it gets automatically created for you. And this is just a shorthand, so you could just do like fields equals underscore underscore all underscore underscore tests are empty and URLs. So this is just the URLs that I have to like send a request to if I for the specific jobs I have. So this is just sort of like the URL where it starts or the what it ends with in this case, the method that it calls, and the name of the endpoint. And then here are your API views. So you have your get, post, put, delete methods. And I'll show you. So let me start the server. So yes, Python manage.py run server. Okay, I'll show you guys the admin side first. So if I copy this URL, wait, sorry, I forgot something. I would have to, actually, let me just check. I'll go into this and I do /admin. I don't think I've created a super user yet. Okay, so I haven't. So the way we would do that is create super user. You get this wizard that helps you. You can leave all this blank. I use a really simple password, so I'm just going to use this to bypass it. And then now, if I use Python manage.py run server, refresh this. Now log in. I'm logged in. So you can use this to debug your stuff as well. Um, so as you can see, to do, I can add a to do here. Um, so go to the gym. So this is just adding to the database. Um, an admin site, so like an easy site to view view the stuff in your DB. Okay, so moving on to Postman. So let's say copy this URL. So if you look at the code, my URLs, I have, okay, for my in my main app, I say API slash, and then whatever's after that is from todo.urls. So, oh shit, API slash todos. Actually, is this big enough? Yep. So todos, and this calls views.getTodos. So this gets everything. The first one here, get. So this should, yep, here we are. The first two to-dos. All right, next we would have add to-do. So I can change this to add to-do. And and this here is a add to-do calls views.add to-do. This is a post request. So I change that and it takes in a body. So that you would click on body and click on raw. And we are going to be sending a JSON. So in this case, the field would be, if you go to models, to-do item. So to-do item. And I'm going to put go to the beach. And I'm going to send it. So false. And now if I open a new tab and I just copy this, actually let's create a few more. Instead of go to the beach, I go to the shops. Create a few. Go to the park, right? And then now if I request this, They all show up here. I can get all my to-dos here. Okay, and then next thing on URLs is we can retrieve specific to-dos. So that would be also you can include parameters in your URLs by doing something like this here at the end of it. So retrieve to-do. Let's say I want to retrieve number 4. Go to the beach. So I can retrieve specific to-dos like that. Another important functionality is updating things. So updating the to-dos. I have this URL here, update to-do, and this would take in a body. So let's say this is false at the moment. Let's change that to complete equals to true. JavaScript. Sorry. I'm not sure why this is giving me an odd JSON. Yep. Sorry, post. Yeah, I don't know why this is not working. 1 second. Okay, I'll show you the delete functionality. So then we have deletes as well, where you can just specify the to-do ID that you'd like to delete. So let's delete that instead. Delete to-do. So change this to delete. 200 status, which means it's successfully deleted. And then we also have the delete all method, which is this here. Delete all to-dos, and that doesn't take in a parameter. So that is delete to-dos. Yep. So now that I've deleted all to-dos, if I go back to this and I try and request API to-dos, I should get an empty list. A few things with naming. So if you are with URLs, if you are doing something to a whole bunch of things, you should put a slash at the end, like a trailing slash. Whereas if you are doing it just to one specific thing, you don't need the trailing slash. That's the convention I've been following. But yeah, this is a simple to-do API. Do we have any questions?